Hi, today we're going to be looking at postmodernism. Exactly what is it? So, what is the definition? Postmodernism is a term that has come to describe the stylistic developments that depart from the norms of modernism. Robert Venturi, in his 1996 book, Complexity and the Contradiction in Architecture, questions the validity of the emphasis of modernists on logic, simplicity, and order, suggesting that ambiguity and contradiction may also have a valid place. Design directions introducing color, ornament, references to historical styles, and elements that sometimes appear eccentric or disturbing have come into increasing use. Debate continues as to whether the postmodernist direction is destined to become the main line of future development or no more than a fashionable trend soon to be forgotten. Well, as we can see, postmodernism has continued. Andy Warhol is a good example of how we move in from modernism to postmodernism. This is one of his very familiar silk screens called Campbell Soup Can from 1962. We'll take a look at that a little bit more later. But first, let's take a look at pop art in general. So the term pop art was referring to popular culture, and so they were shortened the term to pop art or popular culture art. The term first appeared in Britain during the 1950s and referred to the interests of a number of artists in the images of mass media, because now you have to realize that we're getting television in every home. And so advertising, comics, and consumer products are becoming part of daily life and part of popular culture. The 1950s was a period of optimism in Britain following the end of the wartime rationing, and a consumer boom took place, just like it did here in the United States. Influenced by the art scene in Eduardo Palozzi's 1953 exhibition Parallel Between Art and Life at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and by American artists such as Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, British artists such as Richard Hamilton and the Independent Group aimed at broadening taste into more popular, less academic art. Hamilton helped organize a group called The Man, Machine, and Motion, an exhibition in 1955, and then This Is Tomorrow, with its landmark image, Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different and So Appealing, from 1956. We're going to look at that work in just a second. Popular culture art, therefore, coincided with the youth and pop music phenomena of the 1950s and early 1960s and became very much a part of the image of fashionable swinging London. Peter Blake, for example, designed album covers for Elvis Presley and the Beatles and placed film stars such as Brigitte Bardot in his pictures in the same way that Andy Warhol was immortalizing Marilyn Monroe in the United States. Popular art culture, or pop art, came in a number of waves, but its adherents were Joe Trilson, Richard Smith, Peter Phillips, David Hockney, R.B. Kitaj, and many others. And they shared the same interests in the urban consumer modern experience. So the first image that we know of as being a pop art image is this one by Richard Hamilton. It measures 10 by 25 inches, 10.25 inches by 9.75 inches. The work is now in the collection of the Kunsthalle Tübingen in Germany. It was the first work of pop art to achieve iconic status. The name of the piece is probably one of the longest named pieces I know of. What is it that makes today's home so different and so appealing? In this iconic collage by the British artist Richard Hamilton, created in 1956, we see a mid-century living room filled to the brim with logos and cut-out images of consumer products. At the center, a lampshade is emblazoned with the emblem for an auto manufacturer, Ford. The cover of a comic book hangs on the wall as wall art, because before that, comic books were really considered low art. And a can of tinned ham sits on the coffee table like a decorative vase. Found images and mass media artifacts are everywhere that we look in this image, on the television, out the window, up the stairs, and on the floor. In fact, even the couple who occupy the room appear to us as a commodity, so not really real, more like models, right? The wife, a nude model, is perched seductively on the couch, while the husband, a Herculean bodybuilder, shows off his covetable physique, wielding a suggestive Tootsie Pop by his waist. So often interpreted as a kind of idealized modern-day Adam and Eve, the couple are also products on display, no different from the branded and packaged goods that adorn their entire home. So it's this idea of kind of taking realism and rethinking it. The title of this art work takes a form of a question. Just what is it that makes today's home so different and so appealing? Phrasing that echoes the titles of articles in popular magazines, and which can be answered somewhere in a kind of dizzying array of consumer imagery strewn across the work surface. The domestic space, Hamilton asserts, has become prime real estate for advertising, just like we wear shirts that have names of artists or names of companies on our back. We literally have turned the home into an advertising space. It's an arena in which middle-class aspirations are on full display in the form of futuristic vacuum cleaners and television sets. Following the victory of the Allied forces in World War II, the United States in particular experienced a period of economic boom. Factories that had been mobilized to create airplanes and artillery and other military necessities were now all being repurposed towards the manufacturing of popular culture and luxury items and household goods that were then exported worldwide. So America was really pushing its Western values everywhere. Produced amidst the arrival of American goods in the United States, Hamilton Collage is one of the first works that would later be known as the pop art movement, a genre which both celebrated and critiqued subjects such as consumerism, celebrities, and the cheapening of modern culture amidst the turn toward mass production. Another artist that we see in popular culture is Jasper Johns. He was born in 1930 in Augusta, Georgia, and he grew up in South Carolina. He was drafted into the Army, and he was stationed in Japan. Between 1949 and 1951, he studied at the University of South Carolina, Columbia. From 1952 to 1958, he worked in a bookstore in New York. This is one of his first major paintings. It's called Flag, from 1954 to 1955, and it's created with encaustic. Encaustic is a type of painting that uses wax, and the wax is pigmented and then dripped into the surface to create the shape, the images that you see here. So this was created when Johns was about 24 years old, 2 years after he was discharged from the U.S. Army. This painting was the first of many works that Johns made, as he said, that were inspired by a dream of the U.S. flag in 1954. It is one of the paintings for which John is best known. It is held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The work measures 42.2 inches by 60.6 inches. It is made using encaustic, which again is oil paint and newsprint collage on several separate canvases mounted onto a plywood board. The painting reflects the three colors of the U.S. flag, red, white, and blue. The flag is depicted in the form that it took between 1912 and 1959, with only 48 white stars on a blue canton, representing the then 48 United States, excluding Alaska and Hawaii, and with 13 red and white stripes. Newsprint is visible under the stripes if you look closely. Reading the text, it is clear that the newsprint was not selected at random. John steered clear of headlines or national or political news and used inconsequential articles of advertising. The painting has a rough textured surface, and the 48 stars are not identical. It is dated to 1954 on the back side. Johns made over 40 works based on the United States flag, including large and monochrome white flags in 1955 and his famous three flags from 1958. The three flags with superimposed flags showing a total of 84 stars. His 48 flag from 1958 was purchased in 2010 by a hedge fund manager for over $110 million, making it the most expensive work sold by a living artist at the time. As of 2023. This is another work by Johns. It's called Target with Four Faces. This is encaustic and plaster. In this work, Johns effectively merged painting and sculpture while wittingly engaging the viewer with things which are seen and not looked at. As in Flag, John relied on newspaper and fabric dipped in encaustic or wax to build the textured surface of the painting. Secondly, taking into account the historical context of the Cold War era during which Johns was working, Target with Four Faces can be interpreted as a reference to global politics and the media's targeting of the anonymous masses. So it's like we don't really know who these people are, but they're there and they're watching us. This is another of the Target pieces. He had done quite a few of these. This is the plaster cast Target from 1955. Again, it's an example of how he transforms familiar images into tangible objects. It's probably one of the first paintings and sculptures combined. Using wax and caustic, the artist builds up the surface while making concentric circles less precise and more tactile. Here's another one of his. It's called The Painted Bronze. And like many of his contemporaries, Johns was profoundly influenced by the work of Marcel Duchamp and his concept of the ready-made, an ordinary mass-produced object that the artist selects, removes from its functional role, and declares, "This is art." Yet rather than merely presenting objects, John meticulously recreates them. One of his earliest such works is this Painted Bronze, a 1960 hand-painted bronze sculpture of two cast cans of Ballantine ale. Allegedly inspired by the artist Willem de Kooning, Snide remarked that Leo Castelli, John's dealer, was so skilled he could sell 2 cans of beer, and so the sculpture was promptly sold, and the ale cans became one of John's most recognizable and famous motifs. They reappear throughout his work in a variety of media over several decades, just like this. And here we have, this is a picture of Johns in 1988. The next artist I want to look at is Richard Artschwager. He approaches the table with his box, has been placed, he says, he too says, "I don't remember." When asked by an art dealer what is inside the box, he says, "You must remember." And Artschwager quietly says, "Don't ask, don't tell. I was sure it was a total waste of time because I would never see it. I was pretty sure it would not be here alive today." They keep looking at the box. First, he discovers one large, beautiful wooden box with 4 screws in each corner. After unscrewing it, he finds yet another perfect match, just a bit smaller inside of it, and there are 4 boxes in all. Boxes and boxes. Artschwager himself helps open the last one, partly with a screwdriver and partly turning the screws with his fingers. And then last little box begins to fall apart, and the critic says, "Do we take the whole box out?" "No," says Artschwager, "the point has been made." The small screw pieces and lids on each one of the table and the open box is put back into the wall, into the time box frame. This box immediately now looks like a finished work of art, but really it's nothing. And so what he was doing was taking a critique at the art market in general, and that if you'd call it art, and this whole idea of the ready-mades like Duchamp. So again, Artschwager is definitely, and there's many, many more pieces by him, but I just wanted to bring in this one to kind of show you the sort of flippant attitude of many of the postmodern artists. Roy Lichtenstein, a New York native, born in 1923 and died in 1997, began his art studies in 1939 at the Art Students League under urban scene painter Reginald Marsh. The artist continued his studies at the Ohio State University, where he was introduced to European modernism and the works of Picasso and Klee and Kandinsky. His studies were interrupted by military service, but after the war, Lichtenstein returned to Ohio State and completed a Master's of Fine Art degree in 1949. In the Car is an example of Lichtenstein's romance comics. So these pieces are incredibly large. You know, they're many, many feet long and tall, so they would cover an entire wall. And he uses the style of comics. Remember in the very first piece we looked at how a comic was on the wall. So this idea that comic was low art was something they were kind of fighting against. We see here the focus is on a young woman, romantically entangled and hopelessly unhappy. The painting depicts an unhappy couple driving in a car. She stares straight ahead, while he, driving and not looking at the road, glares at the woman beside him. This image is typical of Lichtenstein's work and demonstrates his fascination with women in the midst of love affairs with men who didn't treat them well. This is another piece by him. It's called Crack, from 1964 or 63. There's some, discussion around that. It's a pop art lithograph. In, again, his comic book style of using Ben-Day dots and a text balloon. So if you look at these dots, that was like what we used in halftones when printing. So he tried to recreate that in his painting. It was used in marketing materials for one of Lichtenstein's early shows. It is one of several of his works related to military art and monocular vision. When Lichtenstein had his first solo show at Leo Castelli's gallery in New York City in February of 1962, it sold out before its actual opening. The exhibition included Engagement Ring, Blam, and The Refrigerator. The show ran from February 10th through March 3rd, 1962. After a West Coast exhibition of art at the Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles from April 1st to the 27th in 1963, Lichtenstein had his second solo show. And in that show, he had Wham, Drowning Girl, Torpedoes, Baseball Manager, In the Car, and Conversation. This piece was named for the large graphic text, Crack. It's an offset lithograph on lightweight white woven paper. According to Lichtenstein, it was a marketing poster that was published to announce Lichtenstein's exhibition September 28th in 1963. The Foundation notes that the work is sometimes dated 1964, with numbered impressions that were inscribed reflecting that date. The screen-printed collage image presents a beret-clad woman shooting a rifle. Lichtenstein recomposed the comic book source from a story written by Bob Haney and illustrated by Jack Abe in the Star-Spangled War stories from April and May of 1962. The edition was number 102. By replacing the mound of sand with what seems to be a stack of sandbags, he also isolated the figure by cropping the foreground and background elements. According to art historian Michael Lobel, monocular vision is the motif in which the subject is depicted frontally in such a way as to expose both eyes to the viewer, yet which has one eye closed or otherwise obscured, and not those in which the subject is depicted in profile. The main subject has one eye opened and one eye closed, which relates to a pervasive theme of monocularity in Lichtenstein's art that Lobel was first to analyze, which also includes works such as Torpedo and I Can See the Whole Room and There's Nobody in It. The work also is related to Lichtenstein's theme of the machine and embodied vision, as exhibited in works such as OK Hot Shot and OK Brat and The Jet Pilot. This one is Wham! It's a 1963 diptych by Lichtenstein. It is one of the best-known works of pop art among Lichtenstein's most famous paintings. Wham! Was first exhibited again in 1963 and is purchased by the Tate Gallery in London in 1966, and it has been in permanent display in the Tate since 2006. The left-hand panel shows a fighter plane firing a rocket that in the right panel hits a second plane, which explodes in flames. Lichtenstein adapted the image from several comic book panels, with the primary source being a panel illustrated by Irv Novak in 1962 War Comics. Lichtenstein transformed the source by presenting it as a diptych while altering the relationship of the geographical narrative elements. Wham! Is regarded for the temporal, spatial, and psychological integration of two panels. The panel's title is integral in the action and the impact of the painting, and displayed in large omniopia on the right panel. Lichtenstein studied as an artist before and after serving in the United States Army during World War II. He practiced anti-aircraft drills during basic training, and he was sent for pilot training, but the program was canceled before it started. Among the topics he tackles in his art were war, romance, and romance and war. He depicted aerial combat in several works. Wham! Is part of a series on the war that he worked on between 62 and 64, along with As I Open Fire is one of his two very large themed war paintings. And here's one last later painting, Untitled, from 1963, just kind of a basic sandwich. Here's another untitled piece from 1963. Okay, let's take a look at James Rosenquist. Born in Grand Forks, North Dakota on November 29th, 1933, his family settled in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the midst of World War II in 1942. He wins a scholarship to study at the Minneapolis Art Institute and eventually studies with William Booth. He works for a billboard company by the name of General Outdoor Advertising and paints commercial billboards. It is a card-carrying member, and he is now a card-carrying member of the Sign, Pictorial, and Display Union, Local 230. This is his painting President-Elect from 1960 to 61. Like many pop artists, Rosenquist was fascinated by popularization of politics and cultural figures in mass media. So we see them over and over again. So you see them on television, you see them on billboards, you see them on buttons. So in his billboard style of painting, President-Elect, the artist fuses Madison Avenue caliber advertising with political ambition by depicting John F. Kennedy. This is another of his. It's called Hey, Let's Go for a Ride. It juxtaposes a soft drink bottle with a smiling face, transposing advertising images from a billboard to a stretched canvas. Rosenquist crops and layers them with such jolting verve that he loosens their representational moorings. This is another painting completed by Rosenquist in 1961 at a time when America was changing in all categories, including technology, consumerism, sexuality, and politics, to name but a few. Rosenquist was influenced by and featured all of these categories in his work. In his piece, I Love You with My Ford, I think Rosenquist was portraying his views on consumerism, a subject which was prevalent in many other artists' work, which along with Rosenquist could be deemed as pop art. In the pop art movement, domestic items and advertising were the main feature of which we can see in work like Andy Warhol's famous Campbell's soup can, which portrays an ordinary soup can, which was so commonplace, much like the spaghetti he's seen here in Rosenquist's piece. I think advertising is also a very important part of this piece. It is important to notice that Rosenquist, along with other pop artists like Lichtenstein, painted large-scale advertising billboards before becoming an artist. The effects of advertising in consumer culture can be seen clearly in his work. Take a minute to look at the images. The grill of a Ford, a woman sensually opening her mouth, a close-up of the spaghetti. All the images are zoomed in to remove any context, just like in advertising. The woman in the center of the piece could represent the sexual nature of advertising, an element which can be seen in artists like Richard Hamilton's work, who uses Sophia Loren's collapsed lips with a magazine advert in his piece. Hers is a lush situation. This is an erotic element of advertising, which could also be seen in Rosenquist. The car also strongly points to consumerism as the motor industry continued to grow and cars were becoming more and more commonplace. The images are made to seem more powerful when in juxtaposition next to each other, as the link between three images is not obvious. And here's one more of Rosenquist's work. This is an incredibly large panel piece, one of the most iconic works of the post-war American art, F-111, from 1965. The right half of it, this is just the right half of the painting, has recently been reinstalled in the Museum of Modern Art. It was one of the first paintings regarded as a form of protest against the Vietnam War and is perhaps Rosenquist's masterpiece. It is comprised of 23 panels and is 86 feet long. It began in 1964 and caused a sensation when it was debuted in 1965 at Castelli's Gallery. The painting, which covers 4 walls, contains a succession of photo-based images, including a fighter plane, a cherubic child under a hairdryer, and a mushroom cloud of a nuclear blast, and military insignia, which together constitute a potent critique of American capitalist military society. All right, let's move on to Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was born Andrew Warhola in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1928. In 1945, he entered the Carnegie Institute of Technology, where he majored in pictorial design. Upon graduation, Warhol moved to New York, where he found steady work as a commercial artist. He worked as an illustrator for several magazines, including Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, The New Yorker, and did advertising and window display for retail stores such as Bonwit Teller and I. Miller. Prophetically, his first assignment was for Glamour magazine for an article titled Success is a Job in New York. Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes are precise copies of commercial packaging. While they fulfill the idea that art should imitate life, they also raise questions about how we identify and value something as art. If Warhol transformed a mundane commercial product into a work of art, how did that transformation happen? In reference to his boxes, Warhol later says he wanted something ordinary. It was this mundane commercial subject matter that infuriated the critics. The perfectly blank, machine-made look of Warhol's boxes contrasted sharply with the gestural strokes of abstract expressionist paintings. And I think that another thing is happening here. You know, we think of a lot of paintings, a lot of representation of the world around us. You know, how do we sustain ourselves in that world? And if we go all the way back to the ancient prehistoric part of this course, there was a lot of paintings of animals, and we start to look at, you know, sustenance. We look at hunters and gatherers and how do we protect ourselves. And suddenly, and here we are in these current cities where we don't hunt and gather anymore. We go to the grocery store. And when we go to the grocery store, what do we see? We see our sustenance. And so he starts to look at these ideas as being just like landscapes, and they are not landscapes of the natural world, but landscapes of the man-made world. Campbell's soup cans, sometimes referred to as 32 soup cans, is a work of art produced between November 1961 and June of 62 by Andy Warhol. It consists of 32 separate canvases, each containing measuring 20 inches by 16 inches in width, and each consisting of a painting of a Campbell's soup can. One of each of the can's soup varieties the company offered at the time. The works were Warhol's hand-painted depictions of printed category deriving from commercial productions and popular culture and belonged to the pop art movement. Warhol was a commercial illustrator, as we had said, and when he embarked on painting of the Campbell soup cans and showed them in his first one-man gallery exhibition in 1962 at the Ferris Gallery of Los Angeles, the exhibition marked the West Coast debut of pop art. Blum owned and possessed the painting series until he loaned it to the National Gallery of Art for several years in 1987, and then he sold it to the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in 1996. The subject matter initially caused offense, in part of it for its affront to the technique and philosophy of the earlier art movements of abstract expressionism. Warhol's motives as an artist were questioned. Warhol's association with the subject led to his name becoming synonymous with Campbell soup cans. Warhol produced a wide variety of artworks depicting soup cans during these three distinct phases of his career, and he produced other works using a variety of images from the world of commerce and mass media. After considering litigation, the Campbell Soup Company embraced Warhol's Campbell soup cans theme. And today, you know, there's not any real, push to, there was never any real litigation. Although it would be widely announced in May of 1962 issue of Time magazine as late as March 1962, Warhol sought secrecy for his Campbell Soup projects, stating his hopes that the Campbell Soup Company knows nothing about these paintings. The whole point would be lost with any kind of commercial tie-in. During the first week of July in 1962, at the exhibition, Campbell Soup CEO William Murphy sent a team of legal representatives to evaluate the use and violation of trademark. Initially, Campbell Soup Company considered legal action, but decided to evaluate the public's reaction to the art first. Within months of the original 1962 exhibition, Campbell Soup cans were flying off the shelves. Cans-derived painted attire was in vogue, and Manhattan high society started wearing Campbell Soup cans. Later that year, the company decided to give Warhol a $2,000 commission for a Campbell Soup tomato can as a painting as a gift for Oliver G. Willits, its retiring chairman of the board. In 1964, Campbell sent Warhol free cans as a sign of respect. In January of 1967, the company took legal action against Warhol for using a soup can label without consent for an Institute of Contemporary Art Boston show announcement. Also in 1967, Campbell sent a letter to Random House against Warhol for using the soup can label without consent. And in a Boston show, Campbell sent another letter when Warhol was going to publish his book. regarding Campbell's legal perspective on his art, noting that Warhol would not be considered in conflict with their corporate intellectual property as long as he did not paint the logo on actual soup cans. The letter also included a formal denial that Campbell had ever had any influence on Warhol's artistic subjects. The same year, the company produced a promotional super dress that could be purchased for $1 and 2 soup can labels in 1985. The company also commissioned Warhol to paint its dry soup boxes as well. In 1993, the company brought a Warhol tomato soup can painting to hang in its corporate boardroom at its headquarters, and by 2012, the company had a licensing agreement with the Warhol estate to use Warhol's renditions on a variety of merchandise. That year, the company celebrated the 50th anniversary of the series by partnering with Target Corporation to release 4 different Warhol-inspired limited edition designs of condensed soup cans pictured in the United States. Wow. And so here we have one of those psychedelic tomato soup cans. This is from 1966. Okay, let's move on to Robert Rauschenberg. Robert Rauschenberg was born Milton Rauschenberg on October 22, 1925, in Port Arthur, Texas. He began to study pharmacology at the University of Texas, Austin, before being drafted into the U.S. Navy, where he served as a neuropsychiatric technician in a U.S. Navy hospital corps in San Diego. In 1947, he enrolled in the Kansas City of Art Institute and traveled to Paris to study the Académie of Julian the following year. In fall of 1948, Rauschenberg returned to the United States to study under Joseph Albers at Black Mountain College near Asheville, North Carolina. During intermittent study there through 1952, he met avant-garde creative partners John Cage and Mayers Cunningham, with whom he would later collaborate. While taking classes at the Art Institute League in New York from 1949 to 1951, Rauschenberg was offered his first solo exhibition at the Betty Parsons Gallery. Some works from this period include blueprints, monochromatic white paintings, and black paintings. From fall of 1952 to the spring of 1953, he traveled throughout Europe and North Africa with Cy Twombly, whom he had met at the Art Students League in New York. During his travels, Rauschenberg worked on a series of small collages, hanging assemblages, and small boxes filled with 4 elements, which he exhibited in Rome and Florence. On his return to New York in 1953, Rauschenberg completed a series of black paintings using newspaper on the ground and began work as sculptures created with wood, stones, and other materials found on the street. By the end of 1953, he had begun his red painting series on canvases. We're going to take a look at one of the beds that he does, a painting called Bed. He also began to use silkscreen paintings in 1962 in his first retrospective at the Jewish Museum. This is a painting. This next piece is a sculpture and collage called Monogram, made between 1955 and 1959, and it belongs to a series of what he calls combines, a term coined by Rauschenberg. Combines merge aspects of painting and sculpture to become entirely new artistic category. Art critic Leo Steinberg observed that the orientation of the combines challenged the traditional concept of the picture plane as an extension of the viewer's space, providing a window into another reality. Instead, Steinberg argued a combine is like a tabletop or a bulletin board, a receptor space on which objects are scattered, on which data is entered. Rauschenberg has had seen the stuffed Angora goat, the focus of Monogram, in a window in a secondhand office furniture store in 7th Avenue in New York. He paid $15 towards the asking price of $35. Rauschenberg bought the goat to his studio, and before its completion in 1959, Monogram evolved through 3 states, documented in drawings and photographs. The title is derived from the union of the goat and the tire, which reminded Rauschenberg of interweaving letters into shapes in a type of monogram. Really awesome piece. Here's another. By 1955, the triumph of American painting seemed complete. Europe's luminous haystacks, melting watches, and fractured faces had been eclipsed by Gotham's abstract expressions. Yet that same year, after slathering onto canvases a few rhombuses of dripping paint in homage to his elders, Pollock, who would then be dead inside of a year, Rauschenberg snatched the torch and highlighted comic strips and newspapers and campaign broadsides in his pivotal painting Rebus. Collage was nothing new, but Rauschenberg avoided Picasso's faux chair painting and Ernst's wild fever dreams while pushing past the gray newsprint transfers of de Kooning that de Kooning had introduced into his abstraction. Juxtapositioning colorful Sunday comics with a denatured print of Botticelli's Venus, Rauschenberg's pitted popular trash against high culture as if staging a prize fight. He replaced the classic horizon line with a belt of paint samples that runs down the chromatic gamut while supposing photos of a pair of sprinters, one black and one white, racing from right to left, arriving at a fragment in a political poster that reads, "That represents who? What? A rebus is a puzzle, and that 11-foot wide enigma, still powerful even if yellowed with age, like an old parchment, represents what Thomas Jefferson recommended for the nation, ongoing revolution in art." This is one of the last pieces we'll look at his. It's called Bed. He made Bed in 1955 using oil paint and pencil on a pillow quilt and sheet, backed by wooden supports. This three-dimensional work is nearly 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide, 2 feet 8 inches wide. Because of the protruding pillow, the work is 8 inches deep. The work is about the same size as a twin mattress. It looks like a half-made bed hanging vertically on a wall. To make it, Rauschenberg combined everyday objects, including a quilt, a sheet, and a pillow, with more conventional art objects like paints and pencils. He called this type of work a combine, like we had said before. We'll explore this work in more detail. Like many quilts, this one features a repeated geometric design created from stitched squares arranging in a grid. 4 rows of 4 squares are visible of the quilt, though there may be hidden beneath under thick layers of paint. The quilt squares are made up of several rectangular pieces of fabric. Each quilt block features a small red square in the center, boxed in by several bands of narrow rectangles. In addition to the quilt, the work also has a pillow and a sheet. The pillow juts out from where it is adhered to the very top of the work. The sheets are visible where the quilt has been folded, drawn from the top edge. Rauschenberg added his own marks to the bed. The pillow and the sheet are covered in pencil marks. They trace long, jagged lines and patches of dense grayish-black scribbles. The lower half of the pillow, the sheet, and the top third of the quilt are splattered with strokes and drips of red, green, black, yellow, orange, brown, white, blue, and burgundy paint. Some of the color has been squeezed directly out of the tube. In the areas between where the pillow ends and the quilt begins, so much paint has been applied that it's hard to make out the color. About halfway down, we see a tangle and a density of paint, which begins to lessen. And then there are fewer marks and fewer splashes, and then only a few drips on their way to the bottom of the quilt and the end of the bed. So, there's lots of different thoughts about what was happening here. I mean, to me, when I look at it, I think of nightmares and dreams and, this whole idea of like what's happening in art. But to have like this physical representation of a nightmare without the physical nightmare is the actual narrative of the nightmare or narrative of what's happening while the person is sleeping is really interesting. Another artist that I want to look at is Claes Oldenburg. This is the clothespin. Out of the subway entrance in Center City, between 2 office towers in Center Square, rises a giant clothespin facing City Hall with its venerable sculpture of William Penn. Clothespin has been jolting and humorous effect of a familiar object taken out of context. The witty monument was commissioned by developer Jack Wolgan as part of the Redevelopment Authority Percent for Art program. The sculpture invites many interpretations, and Oldenburg himself composed the form to Konstantin Brancusi's famous sculpture, The Kiss. Oldenburg has been noted for his attempts to democratize art, and the clothespin certainly draws a reaction from everyone who passes it. After the installation in 1976, cab drivers, pedestrians, art enthusiasts, and local office workers admired it or joked about it, and soon it became a Philadelphia landmark. But the sculpture's resemblance to a daily object should not obscure its artistic qualities. It is not, in fact, a reproduction of an ordinary clothespin, but a sweeping, stylized version. Art critics have written of its soaring look and its velvety texture. It has Corten steel, which turns a warm reddish brown as it weathers. The sculpture invites many interpretations, and Oldenburg compared it to two forms of merging and embrace. And there we have another look. See how big it is compared to the people. It's really gigantic. This is another piece. It's called The Lipstick from 1969. It was actually a tank with a lipstick tube on it. I think it was up for a very short time and then was eventually taken down. Interesting piece to look up if you want to. This is another piece called Spoon Bridge with a cherry. The cherry and the spoon is the brainchild of Oldenburg and his wife, Kuji van Bruggen. It was created in 1988. The sculpture is a playful representation of everyday objects, transforming a cherry and a spoon into a monumental form. The cherry perched atop the shiny spoon is a vivid red, while the spoon's handle gently curves, inviting visitors to explore the sculpture from different angles. Beyond its playful appearance, the cherry in the spoon carries a deeper meaning. The artist intended for the sculpture to be a celebration of the intersection between art and everyday life. By magnifying simple objects that are commonly found in the kitchen, Oldenburg and Van Bruggen encourage viewers to see the beauty of the mundane. The cherry represents a whimsical escape from reality, while the spoon symbolizes nourishment and sustenance and the act of feeding oneself, both physically and creatively. Moreover, some interpretations suggest that the sculpture embodies the duality of life. The cherry, sweet and fleeting pleasure, contrasts with the spoon's functional and longevity. The juxtaposition prompts viewers to reflect on the balance between indulgence and practicality, reminding us that life should be savored while fulfilling our fundamental needs. The last artist that we're going to look at is Bridget Riley. Bridget Riley was born in London and studied there at Goldsmiths College between 1949 and 1952, and the Royal College of Art 1952 to 1955. She was influenced by her study of the neo-impressionist techniques of pointillism, or post-impressionist Seurat, but taking up op art in the early 60s, she continued initially in black and white. It was in 1958 she was deeply impressed by the large Jackson Pollock exhibition at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in London. This was one of the reasons that led her to pursue her own art, finally leaving her job as an illustrator at J. Walter Thompson's advertising agency in 1962. Her subtle variations in size, shape, and position of blocks within the overall pattern is characterized by its intensity and its often disorienting effect. Indeed, the term Riley sensation was coined to describe this effect of looking at a painting, especially her early black and white pictures. And so here we have one of her images. This is optical illusion art. So the idea is that the way that it's painted, it makes you feel like there's a three-dimensional space. So the term op art comes in. There's lots of different optical installation artists, and definitely I think you should look at more of them that are out there. But that's all I'm going to be talking about in this lecture. So thanks, and until next time.